why aren't people buying the cheapest versions of GPUs anymore? Look at the 4090. It costs way more than the 4080, but nobody wants the 4080. The exact same thing happened with the 7900 XTX. That one sold out immediately, but you can still find an XT very, very easily. What's going on here? There's probably a very good reason. Now, of course, when you buy the most expensive GPU, you run a little bit of a risk. Let me give you a really good example, and this is actually kind of embarrassing. This is an RTX 3090 Ti, and yes, it's an EVGA Ultra. It was definitely one of the best 3090 Ti's you could get, maybe aside from the Kingpin. My point here is I bought this at MSRP when it came out. I think it was like January, and it was over $2,200. It was extremely expensive. At that time, nobody knew exactly what was going to happen with the GPU market, and who knew exactly when the RTX 4000 was going to come out. This seemed like a pretty cool GPU. Even 3090s were very expensive still. This was before the market collapsed. Then a few months passed by, and all of a sudden, this thing is selling for like as low as $1,099 for some models, like the Founders Edition, and now it's probably worth like, I don't know, $800 or $900. It dropped a significant amount, and this is like a new GPU. Anybody would be really happy to have this in their system. In fact, even some of the new GPUs like the 7900 XT will have a hard time beating this GPU. And in fact, I even did a video yesterday where I actually did some benchmarks on this and compared it against the 7900 XT, the XTX. In some cases, this is still a fantastic GPU, especially if you pop in that ray tracing. But look at my point here. This was the most expensive GPU at that time, and look at the insane value that it lost. And remember, if you like the best and price to performance, smash that like button and subscribe so we reach 50,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Now, that wasn't really typical for the last few years because GPUs just really held their price. Is that why people have been accustomed to only buy the most expensive models? I mean, let's really answer that question very easily. Even when you're talking about the 4090 and the 4080. 4080 is not a good value for performance. If it was $699 like the 3080 was, anybody can see that that GPU would fly off the shelves. There were even different polling numbers done that showed that people are not willing to pay that much for a 4080, and in fact, they much rather pay $700, maybe $800, $900 tops for a GPU like that, and that explains why they don't want the 4080, but how about the 4090? I mean, that's $1,599, and some models get really close to what this was, like $2,000. Why is that one so expensive? The number one reason is purely the performance. There's absolutely nothing that comes close to the performance of that GPU. It basically blew everything out of the water by a significant margin. It's not like, the 3090 Ti was better than the 3090, but a little bit. Was it better than the 3080? Yeah, but maybe a little bit more. The 4090 is a lot better than the 4080. And of course, it's like multiples better than this 3090 Ti, which is a very new GPU. I bet it even smells new. That's the smell of just regret. I would have never done that. I should have waited a few months and this would have been like half the price. But anyway, that's what a lot of people who bought GPUs at the height of the market, I mean, I can tell from experience, that's what a lot of people went through. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people got used to just going for the best, fastest GPU. It doesn't always make sense. The 4090 is a bit unique because I guess if you break down the price to performance, compare it to the 4080, it actually does make some sense in terms of what you're getting. It is really good performance and it's well-rounded. And by that, I mean ray tracing is amazing, rasterization is amazing, and content creation across the board is unbelievably good with the encoders and of course with machine learning, with, Blender, 3D work. Anybody who does any type of content creation or gaming will be pretty much satisfied with that GPU, as they should be for the price. For comparison, I've even been testing the 7900 XTX, which is actually in the system right behind me, and for considerably less than the 4090, it kind of even beat it in some really weird scenarios, like in Call of Duty, you got higher frames per second, and it typically does well, but it's not well-rounded, meaning like ray tracing is not that great on it. Actually, ray tracing is about the level of this 3090 Ti most of the time, and traditional rasterization, it actually does pretty good, but when you start doing 3D stuff or content creation, it kind of, not that it falls apart, it's just just not on the same level as the 4090. So I guess you can explain it that way. People want the best of the best, and thus the 4080 kind of takes second place because its price to performance is so abysmal. Now, if that 4080 was really $800 or $900 tops, would the same thing happen? Would as many people buy the 4090? That's an interesting question to answer. If that happened, then you can take off the argument that people just bought the 4090 because it's the best and they're going to buy the best, etc. Then it comes back to the price to performance. Is price to performance a more attractive metric than simply the best? I think it is. Historically, it's been. Let's take, for example, the mighty 1080 Ti. This GPU is one of the best examples of price to performance. At $699 at the time, it was a little expensive. That wasn't cheap. It's cheap now, but at the time it wasn't necessarily cheap, but it presented an unbelievable amount of performance that's still good till today. I even tested it alongside modern GPUs and it does fine in a lot of cases. Now, you had more expensive GPUs at that time come out and close to it and a little bit after, for example, such as the Titan GPUs. They often looked almost the same. Maybe they had a Founders Edition cooler that was a little different, and they had a little bit more performance. Sometimes they'd have maybe, better performance geared towards a professional workload, maybe content creation, maybe their VRAM, something like that. But for gaming, they were typically just a little bit better, and they usually cost a considerable amount more. Like I think the Titan around that time was maybe like $1,200 or something like that, compared to the $700 price of the 1080 Ti. Most people bought the 1080 Ti because it was just a logical gaming price to performance thing to do, just like with the RTX 3080. And then when the 2080 Ti came out, even though that was the best GPU at that time, because of the high price, a lot of people didn't buy it. What did they buy? Well, a lot of people still bought the 1080 Ti. That's why the 20 series actually didn't sell that, because the price to performance was not that good. Was the 2080 Ti a better GPU than the 1080 Ti? Of course, it's going to be faster, it's going to be better, but not by that much, not a huge margin, and for what you're paying, a 1080 Ti still did the job at that time. So it's only until we really get to the RTX 3080 that we start seeing a difference. The 3080 is an amazing performance and price value proposition at $699. When you compare the 3080 to the 3090, why would you pay twice as much to get only a little bit more gaming performance? The 3090 was geared towards hybrid users, like, if you want the best and you want to do content creation, like you want the 24 gigabytes of VRAM, that's where it's going to come in handy. But for gamers, the 3080 and like the 3080 Ti were really more than enough. So the crypto mining craze, of course, threw a wrench into the pricing of everything, and it made the 3080 almost as expensive as some of the 3090s for a lot of the time. But the sentiment in the beginning, people weren't really that enthused with the 3090. Did the 3090 sell a lot? Yes, it did. And there are a lot of factors like crypto mining that kind of caused it. And we're never really going to be able to get an accurate picture of the reason why certain GPUs during this time of this GPU shortage sold more than others. Now, we're starting to get a little bit back to normal, and we come back to that question of price to performance or having the best one. In this case, it's actually reversed a little bit. It's not a 1080 Ti situation. The GPU that's cheaper, the 4080 or the 7900 XT, both are a few $100s cheaper or $100 cheaper in the case of the AMD GPU than the highest end model that just came out. But people are not buying them. Why? Because they have worse price to performance. So are people getting the more expensive ones because they're the best, or because this time it flipped? The price to performance of the expensive GPUs, finally, it's better than the cheaper GPUs. You are paying more, but on average, you're going to be paying more for more performance. Typically, in the past, it never worked like that. You would pay more for diminishing returns, you would pay more for less performance, and you would get a little bit more than the previous model, but not a huge amount. Now you're getting a massive amount more, and typically the price of the second item, like the 4080 or the XT on the 7900 case, really is already really high. Why would you buy an $899 XT when you can buy a $999 XTX and get another tier almost of GPU performance? It's definitely a big gap, as well as the 4080 versus the 4090. There are some 4080s like the Strix that cost almost as much as a base 4090. As you can see, price to performance really important, and that probably explains the question of the video. Why aren't people buying the cheaper GPUs or even cheap GPUs? It's because they really want as much performance for the price possible, and sometimes that just happens to be the more expensive product. What we really want to start to see is that price performance come back at the lower price points, so you don't have to spend a ridiculous amount in order to get something that's going to be priced really well. So I'm not sure which GPU will provide that for us. For example, take the 4070 Ti, which is the rebranded 4080 12GB. At $899, Nvidia literally had to cancel that GPU because nobody would buy it. Price to performance, very, very bad. Now, what price would it be great at? $599 of the original 3070 Ti. That, of course, would be amazing, and that GPU would be like a 1080 Ti. Everybody would want to buy a 4070 Ti at that price, not because it's the best, but because it's the best price to performance. $899, it already becomes basically unattainable. People don't want to buy it. People would rather just step up and get something a few $100s more because they're going to get a lot better price to performance. So a GPU like that is going to really make it or break it, depending not on how good it is, but how good it is for the price that it's launched at. I'm curious really what it's going to be, because it's going to really stir the pot if you compare it to the Nvidia GPUs that are out now, RTX 3000, 4000, and what AMD just released, the cheapest being $899, plus all the RX 6000 out on the market. If Nvidia released that 4070 Ti at a really aggressive price, they could definitely dominate that market that's been really, really wanting a next generation GPU in a cheaper price class. $899 is not going to do it. $799, people will buy it, of course, but it's not going to be that big of an impact. At something like $699, the price of the original 1080 Ti, I think the 4070 Ti would probably be one of the most popular GPUs, but anything more, it's really not, and anything less, I really doubt Nvidia would do that because they still have a lot of GPUs to get rid of. All right, guys, so let me know what you think. Is price to performance more important, or having the absolute best regardless of the price? What are people thinking nowadays? Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.